So now I would like to introduce to you the next speaker. It's Jana Sochor from University of Chalmers. And she will present their experiences from a field trial of UbiGo, the case of mobility as a service.
Hello, my name is Jana Sochor, and I will be talking today about the field trial that we ran in Gothenburg a couple years ago. And I am here instead of one of my co-authors who was originally supposed to be here, Marianne. So this is a actually very difficult trial to present in 15 minutes because it's such a rich experience with a lot of material. So I will just be trying to run through some of the highlights, but if you're more interested, we do have a lot of papers and presentations, so you're more than welcome to come talk to me later. So what has been tried already? Of course, we've tried to convince people to stop using cars, start using public transport, to improve public transport, to introduce new kind of schemes like bike and car sharing, and really looking at what people have been doing already rather than what people need. So now, but none of this has really quite worked to achieve what we want to achieve. So now people are starting to talk about mobility services. There are various terms bounced around. We did this trial before the mobility as a service term had gotten trendy. But in Europe, at least, this term mobility as a service has been proposed as one of the ways forward. And there's a lot of discussion about what that means, but here's one version of it, a mobility distribution model in which a customer's major transportation needs are met over one interface and offered by a service provider. So what we did in the UbiGo trial in Gothenburg was we had a mobility service, which I will describe more in detail in a minute. But we had real households paying real money for real services. We had 5 modes: rental car, carpool, or car sharing, sorry, bilpool in Swedish, public transit, bike sharing, and taxi. And households, individuals in households in their subscriptions would access these things through an app on their phone to make bookings, to activate public transit tickets, to manage their subscription, et cetera. So that was the idea of the service. Again, if you want to know more later, please come talk to me. So we had extensive data collection analysis from the participants. We had questionnaires before, during, and end, and we also did a 6-month later questionnaire to follow up. We had travel diaries, focus groups, interviews, customer service errands, and then we also talked to non-participants, people who had expressed interest but who did not eventually join. But I will not be talking about them today. So who participated during these 6 months? There were 83 subscriptions covering 195 people. There was the opportunity to set aside your private car during the trial. So we had 20 private vehicles set aside, 17 were from single vehicle households. And the majority of people were typical kind of center of Gothenburg demographics: live in an apartment, working, have a driver's license and public transit card, but don't necessarily have daily access to a car. They were not already subscribing to a car sharing or bike sharing system. And they were connected, keeping in mind you have to have a smartphone to use the service. And they were quite curious and change-seeking, so we classified them as likely innovators or early adopters. So what happened during the trial? Well, one thing that's kind of surprised everybody was that even though we had helped them set up their subscription, they could modify their subscription from month to month, people still overestimated how much transport they needed. They overestimated both daily transit tickets but especially car hours. You see overestimations by about 15% and then 30% for car. Most of the people did report travel behavior changes, most common being that they changed modes, but that they also changed how they planned. Particularly, of course, the people who gave up their car, but people in general planned more, although they didn't necessarily think this was bad. Because now, and this is also linked to, for example, changes in trip chaining. Now there are far fewer spontaneous trips. They tried to trip chain more and do errands together in the same trips. Sorry, I should go back and mention how they paid. It was a household, an invoice, monthly invoice for the whole household. And you determined in your subscription how many days of public transit and how many car hours you wanted. And you could top up credit or roll over credit from month to month. So that can help explain a bit more about some of these answers. We do have other analyses where we identified different subgroups, even within this fairly homogeneous group. We did have what we call shedders, keepers, already car sharers, and accessors. So these were people, the shedders were people that were trying to give up their car to see if they could live without a car. Keepers were people who owned cars but did not give up their car during the trial. And these last two were people who did not own cars, but one of the groups was already trying car sharing and the one wasn't. So they were trying to see, can we get access to a car in another way without having to buy one for ourselves? But all of these groups did trial new types of behaviors and shift towards more sustainable choices. And people talked about how they really learned about how to use the different modes. In general, they reduced their use of private car and increased their use of other modes, and they really thought they could better match each trip's conditions to the mode they would choose for that trip. And they became less positive towards private car and more positive towards other modes. I'm sorry, I really need some water. Is it possible to get some? Sorry. Sorry about that. So it was very, very successful from the user perspective. 97% wanted to keep using it, 93% would recommend it to others, 97% who reported changes were satisfied with the changes. We did ask them if they thought the changes would remain even after the trial. And this is evidence that these kinds of services can be very important for supporting behavioral change, because you see this 32% and this 17%. A lot of the reasons saying why the changes won't or might not remain were because this service wouldn't be there anymore. This service was supporting their changes of behavior. This is one of my favorite graphs from the results, showing how much more satisfied people became. Not only did they become more satisfied overall, but the percentage who were highly satisfied increased. And we did not find any differences in satisfaction between these various subgroups that I mentioned. And after it ended, people said it's now really noticeable that we're not in UBGO anymore. It feels really awkward to travel in the usual way. So what contributed to the success of this trial? We identified some factors, one being, since we're in Sweden, the transportation smorgasbord, that everything's in this package, all in one spot. They don't have to go to different places to get the different things. The service was simple. Your whole household was in the subscription. There was one invoice. Everything was in your smartphone. It was closer to a pay-per-use system than you would get normally. There were daily tickets for public transit, which did not normally exist. So a lot of these things just made it much more simple for people to organize their transport. It also offered improved access. Not only did people perceive that they had more choices, but the choices had also improved because, for example, of the ticketing. Also, the access, mental access was important. When they would go into their smartphone and see the list and have to pick which mode they were going to use, it would help them stop and think, oh, well, maybe I could try something different for this trip. So that their mental access improved as well. The service offered improved flexibility in various ways. Not only were there multiple alternatives, there were reduced sunk costs, and people could better adapt their mode choice to the trip conditions. They could change their subscription from month to month, et cetera. So as one person commented, it's not about being one or the other. It's in terms of users, it's that you're everything, and you can have reasonable proportions of each mode. When do I need one? When do I need the other? And that this threshold was really important, or was really easy to cross. What mode is good for me today? Other contributing aspects or attributes were economy. This system made the household's transportation expenditure more transparent, and as I mentioned before, there were fewer sunk costs. So they felt that it was easy for them to choose different things from day to day. There was also added value or relative benefit compared to their previous existing solution, although keeping in mind that this is a matter of perception, for example, perceived effort of adopting the service. And then also something we call trialability, creating a low-risk environment where people could feel safe to try new things. Like I said, this service was not set up to trial new behavior. It was set up to test the concept. It's a proof of concept, and the business model, et cetera. But people, despite that, people did use it to trial new behaviors because of this low-risk environment. And then because of all of this, this kind of also helped people rethink what convenience meant for them and evaluate the alternatives in new ways. Some people realized maybe owning your own car really isn't as convenient as they thought it was in terms of, for example, parking, maintenance, et cetera. Whereas, if you get a rental car or a car sharing car, you could pick a different car each time depending on what you needed. So just to wrap up, very high customer satisfaction, and we proved the concept. But the trial and the service ended. Why was that? Well, there was a lack of timely financial support. Towards the end, they did want to roll it over into a commercial service, but they needed money to develop particularly the back-end system. And they weren't able to find the capital that was needed in time. But keeping in mind, not because the financiers didn't believe in the idea. It was more other reasons why, which are related to these next points. Another issue had to do with regulation. The trial or the project is not for profit. But then when they were going to roll it over into a for-profit company, a lot of issues came up, such as, well, can and should public transit, which is subsidized by taxpayer money, become a service provider to a for-profit company? But an even bigger question was, does the public transit company want to do this? So there were a lot of, related to the next point, a lot of, say, mental barriers for organizations. This is a new concept. It was a new type of business, at least within urban transport. And this meant that there were new, i.e. unclear or uncertain business relationships that would needed to be formed. For example, potentially new pricing models. They might change your brand identities. It would change the relationship you have with your customers, because now there's another party that's closer to your customer than you have been previously. So all of this really made some organizations, particularly public transit, question what their role in this new kind of service would be. And then all of this is kind of linked to what I call the project curse, i.e. projects end. So even though the whole time we thought, it'd be really great if this became a regular commercial service, in the end, we realized, and this is a tip for anybody in a innovative or innovation project, you really need a very in-depth strategy of how to deal with a successful outcome, because it could happen. So what's going to happen then? How do you carry the project forward to the next level? So mobility as a service relies on collaboration, cooperation, interconnectedness, and not only in terms of services, but in terms of infrastructure, information, payment, a lot of things. And this means boundaries become blurred, not only between the modes, but also between operators. And this has a lot of operators very nervous about what this is going to mean for them. So we've seen that there are a lot of obstacles. I usually say the users are ready to innovate, but is your organization ready to innovate? So we do have other mobility as a service projects and activities that have kind of emerged from our lessons in UBGO, so feel free to talk to me about them. Also, we have a lot of papers that we've written about our experiences in UBGO and some new papers coming out from these other projects as well. So feel free to contact me, and we do have a questionnaire out right now on potential impacts of mobility services, so we would appreciate if you had a chance to answer.
I will ask you the same question I ask Sampo every time I talk to him. The guy you quoted there, the masked guy, Sampo Hietanen.
Yeah.
So let's imagine you overcome all these legal, financial obstacles and you scale up the mass idea. It's everywhere, yeah? It's not 80 people, it's whole Stockholm. Do you see any challenges in that case? Like at that point, not the challenges to get there, but like challenges at that point.
From what perspective? For society, for the operators, for the users, for
anything that you can kind of think about.
Well, of course, there's challenges everywhere, but well, one thing, and I didn't have time to go into this presentation. Like I said, there's so much material that we have and lessons behind this, but like I said, we did see that with this model, people did change their behavior. We see that there's an opportunity to not just rethink transport, going back to the system thinking, but also the opportunity to change behavior. And this link between how the system is designed and behavioral change, I mean, we have some evidence in our case, but there's really not enough evidence. We need more trials, more full-scale trials to really kind of dig into these links between the service design, and I don't just mean pricing, I mean the design of the service as well, and how to influence or nudge, or whatever word you want to use, behavior. Because that's something that we need to come up to another level, I think, because it's not just about making money. Some people are thinking that way, but in my opinion, it's not just about making money. Like I said, there's this social layer of sustainability. So how can we get both of these to work together to reach both these goals, not just the business goal, but these societal goals as well?
Okay, we have.
I have a question.
Yeah?
I think when you said that organizations might not be ready for this, but don't you think that this poses a threat to them, to the current way of doing business? So it's not only, I mean, because when you say they are not ready, you're assuming that this is a state that they aim at, but maybe this state will just take them out of business.
I don't see change as meaning necessarily a threat to your business, as that you're going out of business. I find it very ironic, if I'm going to be a bit self-critical in transport, how we talk continually about how people, individuals, should change their behavior. But then when we look at our organizations, then we really don't want to change how we're organized, how we're thinking in our business. So I do think we need to be a bit more self-reflective in transport, both in academia and industry and public agencies, about changes we can or maybe need to make. And again, especially in terms of the collaboration. Unfortunately, transport is still very silo-oriented, and we need to break these down, but to break these down, we need to work together more.
Yeah, but if you take, for example, the car manufacturers, which could be with different relative power position in different markets, this goes very much into their own logic of like radical change, at least if not putting them out of the market.
Yeah, but that's why they're already moving. This is one of the biggest movers in mobility services now, is the OEMs.